Hello and welcome back to another episode of my Stevenson Weekender sailboat build. In this episode I'm going to get the windows installed in the cabin. Now if you remember from episode 10, I redesigned the cabin top to this more aerodynamic shape. So here I'm using black poster board to experiment with different shapes for windows and their layout. Once I had everything arranged the way I wanted it, I traced around the poster board on the boat and then took the poster board templates and put them on a piece of scrap plywood you see here. As you'll see as this video progresses, I needed a way to make the windows the same shape as the openings in the boat, and I also needed the openings in the boat to be identical on the port and starboard side. So I'm going to spend some time here getting these plywood templates just right. So now that the outside edges of the templates are complete, I can use this compass to mark a consistent distance from that edge for the inside perimeter of the windows that I'll use to make the hole in the boat cabin. Hopefully this will all make more sense shortly when I show you what I'm doing. First I'll use the outside edge of the template to lay out the windows on the plexiglass. For those interested, this is 1/8 inch thick tinted plexiglass. I'm just using this jigsaw with a very fine tooth metal cutting blade, and it did just fine to cut out the pieces. So I did this with all 6 windows, cutting just outside my marks that I had made using the templates. Once I had the pieces cut out, I used this double-sided tape to attach my template to each piece of plexiglass. I'll then use this flush trim bit, running the template along that bottom bearing and allowing the bit to cut the plexiglass to the exact shape of the template. I then took the windows over to the drill press and drilled the holes for the mounting screws. Once the windows were all cut to shape, I used this jigsaw mounted upside down on my bench to cut away the inside portion of my templates. So now I can bring the plywood templates back down to the boat and get them attached back on the boat where I had previously marked for the poster board patterns. I got these attached to the boat using a couple small screws on each one to make them follow the curvature of the cabin top. Once the templates were in place, I was able to cut away this inside section for each window. These were just rough cuts, and I stayed well away from my patterns so that I could then come back with this flush trim bit and run that bearing along the template to make the opening a smooth and consistent size. Once that was finished, then I could remove the template. And of course I had to do this on both sides of the boat using the same templates. Once I had finished cutting the holes in the cabin top, I brought the templates back to the shop to mark out and then cut spacers that I'll use to make small window sills on the inside of the cabin. As you will see in an upcoming video, when I finish the paneling and trim on the inside of the cabin, I needed these thicker window sills to make the paneling have a place to seat and match up with the rest of the inside. I needed 2 spacers for each window, so therefore 4 spacers for each shape, 2 for each side. I used a 23 gauge pin nailer to attach the pieces to each other, and then finally to attach the template to the pieces. I was then, just like before, able to use that flush trim bit with the bearing to run along the template to cut the shapes to match the template. This process left me with 4 identical pieces for each window shape. I used some 5:1 epoxy from TotalBoat and some screws to get these spacers put in place. Those yellow tape strips are there because I quickly found that the 5:1 epoxy stained the TotalBoat WetEdge paint. So I put that yellow tape there just to protect the paint while I worked. So you can kind of see in these shots how those spacers thickened up the windowsill. As mentioned before, this will give me something to screw the inside paneling to once I get to that step. Once the epoxy had had time to cure, I sanded it some and then applied a couple coats of the TotalBoat WetEdge. I figured this would be much easier to do now than once I had the windows in place. If you look closely in this shot, you can see that yellow staining that I was talking about the epoxy causing on the paint itself. To install the plexiglass onto the boat, I used a combination of this 3M VHB tape along with some black caulk and screws. I realize this is probably overkill, but I thought it was the best chance of getting the plexiglass to match the curve of the cabin top and provide some waterproofing. The screws I'm using are a black truss-headed screw that I got from Amazon. So once all the windows were screwed down, I was able to remove that green tape that I had down to protect the paint from the caulk squeeze out. All in all, I think they turned out very nicely. I'll be anxious to see how they hold up over time and whether they are fairly waterproof. In the next video, I'm going to work on getting some of the finish work done on the inside of the cabin so that I can get the cabin opening trimmed out and finished. So I hope you'll join me then when I continue to work on the Stevenson Weekender sailboat. Thanks for watching.